I never thought a simple day hike could turn into something I'd remember for the rest of my life. I'd done plenty of hikes before, nothing special. Trails, trees, some wildlife, the occasional breathtaking view. This one was different, though. It started out just like any other trip. Early morning, backpack packed, water bottles full, snacks tucked inside, map in my hand, boots laced tight. The mountain was somewhere about a 3-hour drive from the city. It was part of a larger national forest that I hadn't explored much, but it looked promising on the map. A trail that looped around a ridge with a stream that crossed near the middle, a waterfall marked on the map, and a little clearing up at the top where people sometimes camped. I left the car around 7 a.m., just as the sun was starting to peek through the thin haze of early summer mist. The air was cool and fresh, and there was a faint smell of pine and damp earth. I could hear birds chirping nearby, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the quiet bubbling of a creek off to the side of the parking area. The trailhead was well marked with a wooden sign, weathered but still clear. I checked my gear one last time, adjusted my pack, and stepped onto the path. The first part of the hike was easy. The trail wound through tall pine and fir trees, the ground soft beneath my boots. The canopy was thick enough to keep the sun off, but patches of blue sky broke through the branches. I moved at a steady pace, enjoying the quiet, the simple rhythm of walking, breathing, and listening. Every now and then, a squirrel darted across the trail, or a woodpecker hammered on a tree trunk somewhere nearby. The air smelled like pine sap and wet moss. About an hour in, the trail began to climb steadily. The ground got rockier. The roots of the trees twisted and spread across the path, making me watch my step. I paused a few times to catch my breath and look around. The forest felt denser here, and the silence was more intense. Just the occasional bird or insect breaking the stillness. I was alone on the trail, no other hikers in sight. At around the 2-hour mark, the trail split. According to the map, if I took the left fork, it would lead to the waterfall and then up to the ridge. The right fork would circle around the base and eventually connect back further down. I picked left without hesitation. The thought of seeing the waterfall pushed me forward. The trail narrowed and the undergrowth grew thicker. Ferns brushed against my legs, and wildflowers peeked out here and there. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and soon I heard the faint roar of the waterfall before I saw it. The path descended slightly to a small clearing near the edge of a rocky outcrop. There it was, water crashing down a jagged cliff, splashing into a pool below. The mist from the falls hung in the air, cool and refreshing. I sat on a nearby rock and took a break, drinking water and snacking on a granola bar. The place was beautiful, exactly what I hoped to find. After resting for a few minutes, I packed up and continued. The trail climbed again, winding along the ridge. The trees thinned, and patches of scrub and rocks appeared. The view started to open up, revealing the forest stretching out in all directions beneath me. The wind picked up, cool and sharp. I could see the faint outline of distant peaks beyond the trees. It was quiet again, except for the occasional whistle of the wind. That's when I realized something was off. At first, it was subtle, the feeling that the forest wasn't quite right. The trees, the underbrush, the rocks, something felt different. Not wrong exactly, but unusual. Like the landscape was telling me something, but I couldn't figure out what. I tried to shake the feeling off and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The trail grew rougher. The rocks became slippery from moisture, and the dirt underfoot was loose. I slowed down, careful with each step. Then I noticed something else. Broken branches, snapped twigs, and scuffed dirt tracks along the side of the trail. Not from hikers, but from animals. Big animals. I stopped and scanned the area. The wind carried the faint scent of something musky, strong. A mixture of wet earth, fur, and something else I couldn't place. My heart started to race. I'd read about bears and mountain lions in these woods. I wasn't worried at first. I had bear spray in my pack, and I'd always thought the chances of a close encounter were low. But now, the signs told a different story. Large paw prints pressed into the mud, too big to be a dog or a deer. Fresh claw marks on the bark of a nearby tree. Something had been here recently, maybe watching me. I debated turning back. The thought made my stomach twist. I had come this far, and the trail ahead promised a clearing at the top, the summit where I could rest, drink water, and maybe even camp overnight if needed. But now the idea of continuing felt risky. Still, I told myself I'd be careful, stay alert, and keep moving. The wind picked up again, carrying a faint, unsettling sound. A low growl? Or was it just the wind through the trees? Couldn't tell. I took a deep breath, adjusted my pack, and moved forward slowly. The trail curved around a bend and dropped sharply down into a small valley. The trees grew denser here, casting shadows over the mossy ground. The air was damp and cool. I could hear the soft sound of a creek somewhere below. I kept my eyes on the trail, scanning the trees and bushes on either side. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of movement, something large just beyond the trees. I froze, heart pounding. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a ripple of leaves and broken twigs. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't a deer or a rabbit. I quickened my pace, trying to put distance between me and whatever it was. The trail climbed steeply now, rocks jutting out at odd angles. I had to use my hands to steady myself at times. My legs burned, sweat dripping down my back despite the cool air. At one point, the trail narrowed to barely more than a ledge along a steep slope. One wrong step would send me tumbling down a rocky hillside. I moved cautiously, every muscle tense. Then I heard it, a sudden crashing noise from below, like a tree or large branch breaking. I stopped immediately, heart in my throat. The sound echoed up the slope and stopped. Silence followed, thick and heavy. I waited, every sense alert. No other sounds, no rustling, no footsteps, just my own breathing. I debated calling out, but I didn't want to attract attention. I looked around. The trail behind me was clear. If I moved back, I could reach a wider path and maybe get to a safer area. But I'd also be retreating into the forest, away from the clearing I wanted to reach. I swallowed my fear and pressed on. The last stretch was the hardest. The air was thin up here, the trail rough and exposed. The sun was higher now, but the wind was bitter cold. My fingers were numb, and my legs felt like jelly. I could see the clearing ahead, a patch of bare earth surrounded by scattered trees and rocks, bathed in sunlight. Relief flooded me, and I broke into a run, stumbling over roots and stones, not caring about my bruised ankles or scraped hands. I made it to the clearing and collapsed on a flat rock, chest heaving, sweat and dirt covering me. I scanned the area. The clearing was quiet, peaceful even. No signs of animals or other people, just sky and trees and the distant mountains. I sat for a long time, catching my breath and drinking water. The fear ebbed slowly, replaced by a calm exhaustion. Then I noticed something, tracks in the dirt around the clearing. Large paw prints, the same I'd seen before, circling the perimeter. They were fresh, maybe from that morning or even the night before. I realized the clearing was a place where whatever had been following me spent time. Maybe it was a bear's resting spot or the lair of a large animal. I wasn't sure. The thought made my skin crawl. I gathered my things carefully and prepared to descend. I didn't want to linger here. I knew I'd have to move fast but also carefully. The way back down was worse. The trail was steeper, the rocks loose, and the forest thick with shadows. I kept hearing noises, snapping branches, rustling leaves, but when I looked, nothing was there. My mind was on edge. Halfway down, I slipped on a patch of wet moss and fell hard, scraping my palms and knees. The pain was sharp and raw. I cursed under my breath but forced myself up. I couldn't afford to stay still. I kept moving, faster now, my heart pounding not just from exertion but from fear. About an hour from the clearing, the trail opened into a familiar part of the forest. The trees thinned, and I spotted the creek from earlier. I paused and took a long drink, filling my bottle. I knew the end was near. As I followed the creek downstream, the forest grew lighter. Birdsong returned, and the smell of pine mixed with something sweet, wildflowers maybe. The parking lot came into view, and relief washed over me. I reached the car as the sun dipped toward the horizon, my legs trembling, my clothes torn and dirty, my body aching. I locked the doors and sat inside. I've always liked being alone in the woods. Calms me down. When you grow up in a busy city where everything is loud, rushed, and crowded, being far away from people feels like peace. I started hiking in my early 20s, just small day hikes at first. But over the years, I built up my stamina and experience. I bought better gear, learned how to read topographic maps, studied how to filter water, and spent more time deep in the backcountry. By the time I was 35, I thought I had a good handle on what I was doing. I had hiked through Utah, Colorado, the Appalachians, and parts of Alaska. So when I planned a 5-day solo hike through a lesser-known section of the Panhandle National Forests in northern Idaho, I didn't think twice. I had all my gear, extra supplies, and a fully charged GPS. I also printed out maps and left my itinerary with my brother. I even told him if I didn't text by the 6th day, he should call for help. It was supposed to be a routine trip. It didn't go that way. I parked my truck on a narrow dirt road around noon on a Tuesday in early September. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that feels clean in your lungs. I checked the gear in my pack again: tent, sleeping bag, bear spray, first aid kit, water filter, a week's worth of food, and 2 backup phone chargers. I locked up, set my GPS, and started heading in. The first day was uneventful. I followed an old fire road that had mostly grown over. The trail wasn't marked very well, but I had a good idea of where I was headed. I moved through thickets of pine and tall grass, the sounds of insects buzzing around my ankles. By evening, I found a good spot near a small creek and set up camp. I boiled water, ate some freeze-dried chili, and lay in my tent listening to the wind in the trees. I slept hard. On the second day, the trail narrowed and got steeper. The sun stayed behind clouds, and the temperature never rose much. Around noon, I found a set of deep scratches on a tree, 3 long gouges, higher than I could reach. I assumed it was a bear. That's normal out there. I kept moving, more alert now. I made sure the bear spray was clipped to my belt and walked with more noise. That evening, I set up camp in a small clearing on a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was beautiful. Layers of dark green trees stretching out for miles, a few jagged peaks in the distance. I set up my bear bag, cooked a quick meal, and got inside the tent. But I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept hearing small sounds, twigs snapping, something brushing against the outer wall of my tent. I told myself it was the wind or a raccoon. But then, just before I drifted off, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was a cough, short, low, and human. I froze. My heart started pounding. I didn't move for a long time. I just listened, but I didn't hear anything else after that. No footsteps, no talking, no animals scurrying off. Nothing. I didn't sleep much after that. I lay still in my sleeping bag until the sky turned gray again. When the sun came up, I got out of the tent fast and looked around. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone being nearby. I packed up in a hurry and moved quickly down the trail. By mid-morning, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe I had just been tired. Maybe it had been some weird bird call that sounded human. But the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I should have turned back then. I know that now, but I told myself I was over halfway in, and it would be faster to complete the loop than backtrack. That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 came later that day, when I followed the wrong game trail downhill and got turned around. The path I took looked well-worn, but it gradually curved away from my original route. I didn't realize how far off I was until I checked my GPS around 3 p.m. I was almost 2 miles off my map trail. I swore out loud and stopped to assess. The smart thing would have been to turn back and retrace my steps. But I saw on the topo map that the valley I was descending into curved back up toward the ridge where I'd camped the night before. I figured I could cut across and meet the main trail further down. It was steep going. My knees were shot by the time I reached the bottom. Thick brush grabbed at my pants and backpack straps. I pushed through willow stands and patches of ferns so dense I couldn't see the ground. My boots got soaked in a small marshy stretch. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. That sounds stupid. I know it does, but I couldn't shake the feeling, like eyes were following me. I kept looking over my shoulder, stopping to listen. but I didn't hear anything except my own breath and the wind. When I finally stopped for the night, I was exhausted. I set up camp in a dense patch of forest beside a wide stream. The light was fading fast, and I knew it was going to be a cold night. I didn't eat much. I just crawled into my sleeping bag, locked the zipper on the tent, and lay there. At some point in the night, I woke up. It was pitch dark. No moonlight, no sounds. But something had changed. The tension in the air was different. It was silent in a way that felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. I stayed still. Then I heard it. Again, a cough. The same one as before. Short, low, human, and close. I reached slowly for the knife I kept beside my bag. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't move more than I had to. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever it was could probably hear it. Then I heard soft footfalls, moving around my tent. Not fast, not heavy, slow, steady. One full circle, and then nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the light finally returned, I climbed out of the tent in a daze. There were footprints, real ones, bare feet from what I could tell. They weren't big, about the size of my own but wide. The dirt around my tent was disturbed like someone had walked around it more than once. I packed up fast and moved again. At that point, I just wanted to get back to the trail and finish the loop. I hiked fast, sometimes jogging when the path allowed it. I ate trail mix on the move and drank from my water bottle without stopping. Every noise made me flinch. Birds, squirrels, even my own steps made me jump. The next night, I didn't camp. I hiked through the dark with a headlamp until I reached the last marked waypoint on my GPS. I knew from there it was a straight shot back to my truck, maybe 4 or 5 miles. I was so tired I couldn't keep my eyes open, but I didn't care. I leaned against a tree, ate a protein bar, and then pushed forward again. Around 3 a.m., I smelled smoke. Not campfire smoke, more like burning plastic. It was faint, but strong enough to cut through the pine scent in the air. I slowed down, listened, and then I saw it, just a flicker of light through the trees ahead. Orange and low to the ground. It wasn't a wildfire. It looked more like a lantern or a fire pit. I stepped off the trail and moved slowly, crouching between trees, trying to stay quiet. Through the trees, I saw a small clearing. There was a makeshift shelter, just a tarp tied between 2 trees, and a small fire burning in a pit surrounded by rocks. Next to the fire was a blackened pot and a small pack. But no one was there. No one at all. No sleeping bag. No gear scattered around. No food. No footprints in the mud. Nothing. It looked like someone had just left it there and walked away. I backed up slowly, kept my light off, and moved as fast as I could without running. I didn't stop again. When I finally saw the dirt road again around dawn, I broke into a full sprint. My truck was still there, covered in dew and dust. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't stop driving until I hit the highway. Later that week, I told my brother and a few friends what happened, but no one really knew what to say. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a ranger. I still don't know what it was. I haven't gone hiking alone since. I still go on trails with friends. Short trips, places with cell service. But I don't stray far anymore, and I never go off trail. That feeling I had out there, being watched, being followed, it never really left me. The forests in northern Idaho are deep and quiet and old. And somewhere out there, someone or something is living off the grid. Watching, listening, maybe just curious, or maybe not. All I know is that I won't be back to find out. It started as a trip I thought would be easy, a quick solo hike on a trail I had walked before in the summer. I had been on many hikes, both solo and with friends, and I thought I knew what to expect. The mountain was well known, the trail marked and popular. I wasn't a beginner, but I wasn't an expert either. Just a regular person who enjoyed the outdoors and the feeling of being alone in the wilderness, away from the noise of the city and the pressures of everyday life. I set out early in the morning, just after dawn, when the air was still crisp and cool. The sky was clear and blue, with only a few light clouds drifting lazily above. The trailhead was quiet, with only a few other hikers preparing to start their day. I had my backpack packed with the usual gear: a map, compass, water bottle, snacks, a basic first aid kit, my phone, and a flashlight just in case. I wore sturdy boots and clothes that could handle the changing mountain weather. I checked the weather forecast before leaving and everything looked good. No rain, no storms, only a steady, mild breeze. The first part of the hike went as expected. The trail wound through thick forest, tall pines and firs casting long shadows on the ground. The smell of pine needles and damp earth filled the air. Birds chirped overhead, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush reminded me I wasn't alone out here. The path was well worn, and the markers were easy to spot. I kept a steady pace, enjoying the silence and the steady rhythm of my footsteps. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned out, and I could see more of the valley below. The sun grew stronger, warming my back and drying the sweat on my forehead. I stopped for a moment to drink water and eat a small snack: a granola bar and some nuts. I checked my map and compass, confirming I was on the right track. Everything was normal, peaceful even. The trail grew steeper and rockier. I took care to watch my footing as the loose stones could easily cause a slip. I felt my legs burning from the effort but welcomed the challenge. The mountain was beautiful, the views stretching for miles. I took a few pictures, careful not to waste too much time. I knew I had to keep moving to reach the summit and make it back before dark. Then, at one point, the trail suddenly became less clear. The markers were missing or covered by fallen branches. The dirt path was faint, broken by roots and rocks. I looked around, trying to find the next sign, but there was nothing. I felt a small wave of unease, but I told myself to stay calm. Maybe I had missed a turn or the marker had fallen. I took out my compass and tried to orient myself. The map showed a fork ahead, but I couldn't see it through the thick brush. I decided to push forward slowly, hoping to find the path again. I moved carefully, using my hands to brush away branches and push through low shrubs. The forest here was dense and shadowed, the air cooler and damper. I heard the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the distant call of a crow, and the faint rustle of something moving nearby, maybe a squirrel or a deer. After a few minutes, I spotted a faint trail again, a narrow opening between trees and rocks. I breathed a little easier and followed it. The ground sloped sharply downward. I realized I was descending, which surprised me since I thought the summit was still ahead. I checked my compass and saw that I was heading east, which seemed off. I stopped, trying to figure out my position. My phone had no signal, so GPS was useless. The map didn't show any clear landmarks nearby except a small creek to the east. I decided to keep going downhill to reach the creek, thinking I could follow it downstream back to the main trail or to the trailhead. The forest here was thick with undergrowth, and I had to push branches out of the way. My clothes snagged on thorns and rough bark. I felt the cool moisture from the ground and the occasional splash from a small stream crossing the path. The light was dimmer under the heavy canopy, and the temperature dropped a few degrees. I realized I hadn't heard any birds or other animals for a while. It was too quiet, unnervingly so. I kept my focus on the ground, trying not to trip. The path was rough, with exposed roots and slippery rocks. I stepped carefully but still slipped once, catching myself on a tree just before falling. My heart beat faster. The feeling of being lost, even in a place I thought I knew well, began to weigh on me. I thought about turning back uphill, but the terrain was steep and dangerous. I also feared that going back the way I came would just lead me deeper into the maze of trees and shadows. So I pushed on toward the creek, hoping it would lead me somewhere familiar. After about an hour of slow progress, the trees suddenly opened into a small clearing. The creek ran through it, clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones. The air smelled fresh and earthy. I knelt down and drank some water, careful to filter it with my shirt. I filled my bottle and rested for a few minutes, trying to calm down. I looked around the clearing, trying to spot the trail or any sign of human presence. There was none. No footprints, no trash, no markers. Just the creek, rocks, and trees. I felt very small and very alone. I knew I had to keep moving before night fell. The sun was already low, casting long shadows and turning the sky a soft orange. I followed the creek downstream, hoping it would lead me to a road or a campsite. The ground was muddy and uneven. The creek sometimes widened into small pools, and I had to walk around or through shallow water. My boots got wet, and the cold seeped into my feet. I ignored the discomfort, focusing on moving forward. As I walked, the forest slowly changed. The trees grew taller and thinner. The underbrush gave way to patches of moss and fallen leaves. I noticed some broken branches and disturbed ground. It looked like something big had passed through recently, maybe a deer or a bear. A sudden movement caught my eye. A large black shape darted across the creek, disappearing into the trees. My heart jumped. It was a bear. I froze, trying to control my breathing. I remembered everything I had read about encounters with bears. Don't run, stay calm, make yourself look big, back away slowly. But I was alone, tired, and lost. The bear didn't seem aggressive. It was more curious or startled. I slowly backed away from the creek and found a large rock to climb on. I sat there watching the area. The bear stayed on the other side, sniffing the air and moving slowly through the forest. After a few minutes, it disappeared from sight. I breathed deeply, trying to relax. That was the closest and most frightening moment so far. I knew that if I encountered a bear like that again, things could be very dangerous. The light continued to fade. I needed to find shelter before dark. I looked for a place to camp. The creek was too open and the ground too wet. I found a small rise nearby with dry grass and some fallen branches. I gathered some wood and dry leaves to build a small fire. I struck my lighter carefully and watched the flames grow. The warmth was comforting. I ate the rest of my snacks, drank water, and rested. As darkness settled, the forest came alive with sounds. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of small animals, the occasional hoot of an owl. The fire crackled, throwing dancing shadows on the trees. I stayed awake for a long time, listening and watching. The fear of being lost mixed with the awe of the wilderness. I felt a deep respect for the power of nature and how small I really was in this vast, wild place. When I finally slept, it was light and restless. I woke several times, hearing noises too close for comfort. I reminded myself that most animals avoided humans and that I was safe for now. At dawn, I packed up quickly and tried to retrace my steps back toward the main trail. The forest looked different in the light. I followed the creek upstream this time, hoping it would lead me to the trailhead. After hours of slow walking, slipping, and climbing, I spotted a familiar tree with red trail markers painted on the bark. Relief flooded through me. I was back on the trail. I kept going, moving faster now, until I saw the parking lot and the signs of other hikers. I was exhausted, wet, and dirty, but safe. That day taught me a lot about respect, caution, and preparation. I realized that even familiar trails can be unpredictable. The wilderness is beautiful but unforgiving. I learned the hard way to always keep a close eye on the map, stay aware of my surroundings, and be ready for anything. I never went back to that part of the mountain alone, but the memory stayed with me. The feeling of being lost, the quiet tension, the bear in the shadows, and the slow, careful steps back to safety. It changed how I saw hiking and how I respected the wild places I love to explore. I had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. Everything had been building up: work stress, constant noise in the city, bad sleep, people everywhere. I just needed to get away from all of it. A friend had mentioned this loop trail out in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in southern Colorado. Not too popular, mostly known among locals. It was about 18 miles in total, with a hard stretch through a narrow canyon and some remote forested ridges near the middle. That sounded perfect to me. I planned it for a long weekend in late September. It wouldn't be too cold yet, and I'd avoid snow. I packed light but thorough: tent, sleeping bag, compact stove, emergency beacon, GPS, map, and enough food for 3 nights. I brought a small bear canister for the food, a headlamp, and my old hiking boots that had held up for years. Everything was checked twice. I left home before 4 a.m. and drove most of the way in darkness. As I neared the trailhead, the light started to creep over the ridgelines. I hadn't seen another car in the last 45 minutes, and the road up to the trailhead was rocky and narrow. It wasn't maintained well, but I had a high-clearance SUV that could handle it. Still, I took it slow. I arrived at the parking area around 7:30. It was a dirt lot with a small sign nailed to a post that said, Pine Gulch Loop Trail, 18.2 miles. I stepped out and breathed deep. Cold air filled my lungs, the kind that bites a little at first and makes your eyes water. I saw my breath, but the sun was rising and it was going to warm up fast. There were no other cars there. I stood for a minute and looked at the woods ahead. It was quiet. The only sound was the creaking of trees and a few birds. I felt good. I felt ready. I strapped on my pack and locked the car, then started walking. The first section of trail was easy. It led through tall pines and aspen groves, and the leaves were starting to change. The air was clean and carried that dry, sharp scent of autumn leaves. The trail was marked with blue blazes on trees, spaced just right. I had no trouble following it. I made steady progress through the morning, stopping only once to eat a protein bar and check my map. I passed a narrow creek with crystal clear water and climbed a gradual slope until I reached a ridge with a decent overlook. Below me was a wide bowl of forest. I could see the trail weaving down into it, then disappearing into a darker line of trees far ahead. That would be the canyon section. I continued hiking until mid-afternoon, when I stopped for a longer break. I ate a proper lunch, jerky, crackers, and apple, and rested on a flat rock in the sun. Everything felt normal. The forest was beautiful and empty. I hadn't seen another person all day. That didn't bother me. It was what I wanted. Around 3 o'clock, the trail dipped into Pine Gulch Canyon. The trees grew thicker there, and the sunlight was more filtered. It got colder too. The air was still and heavy. The trail narrowed and became rough with roots and rocks underfoot. I slowed down and used my poles to help balance. The deeper I got into the canyon, the less I liked the feeling. I couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't fear exactly, just a sense of pressure, like something was different here. It was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my boots hitting the trail. About an hour in, I saw something strange. There was an old piece of camping gear off to the side of the trail, just sitting there. A faded green backpack, weather-worn, and partly covered in pine needles. It looked like it had been there a long time. I didn't touch it, but I looked it over from a distance. The fabric was sun-bleached. One strap had snapped. No sign of a person. That should have been a warning. But I told myself it was probably just left behind years ago. Maybe someone dumped it after it broke. Maybe it was just trash. I kept walking. That night, I made camp near a small clearing just off the trail. The sun had already dipped below the canyon walls, and it got cold fast. I made a small dinner and boiled water for tea. I hung my bear canister far from my tent and crawled into my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep well. I woke up several times in the night, hearing snapping branches outside. Probably animals, deer or maybe a black bear rooting around. I stayed still and kept my hand on my knife just in case. Nothing came close, and I didn't hear breathing or sniffing, just the occasional crunch of twigs underfoot. By sunrise, I was more tired than I'd expected to be, but I packed up and kept moving. The trail wound upward again. I followed it through more dense forest, then up toward the ridgeline that would loop back toward the western edge of the mountains. That part of the trail was more exposed. Fewer trees, more rock and scree. The wind picked up. I reached the ridgeline around noon and stopped to rest again. From that high point, I could see the whole canyon I'd come through the day before. It looked peaceful from up here, just a narrow slash of forest running through the mountains. No sign of anything unusual, but I knew how it had felt inside. The silence, the old gear. I pushed on. My goal was to reach the western fork of the loop and camp near a small lake marked on my map. I figured I'd get there by late afternoon, but I didn't. About halfway there, the trail became hard to follow. The blue blazes disappeared. Trees had fallen across the path in several places. Some sections were washed out, and I had to scramble up muddy slopes or detour around rocks. Then I saw the first boot print. It was fresh. That stopped me. I crouched and looked closer. The heel was crisp in the dirt, not dried or cracked. That meant someone had passed through recently, maybe that morning, but I hadn't seen anyone, and there hadn't been any other cars at the trailhead. My mind started to tick through possibilities. Maybe someone had hiked in from another direction. Maybe they were camping deep in the forest. Maybe I'd run into them soon. But the further I went, the stranger it felt. I saw more prints, all going in the same direction, but not paired like a normal walk. Just the right foot, over and over, always the right. That didn't make sense. Eventually, the trail vanished completely. I checked my GPS. It showed me just west of the marked trail, so I tried to cut back toward it. But the ground sloped steeply downward, and I had to fight my way through dense underbrush and thorny branches. The trees were close together. I had no visibility. I couldn't hear much either, just wind in the treetops. I walked for another hour before I found a rough trail again. It didn't look like the original one. This was narrower with more rock and moss, but it was headed in the right direction, so I followed it. And then I found the second thing I couldn't explain. Pair of gloves, laid out neatly on a rock. They were old leather gloves, worn through at the palms, but not rotten. They weren't buried under leaves or dirt, just sitting there, clean, like someone had placed them there recently. I picked them up and felt them, dry, cold, no bugs, no mold. I looked around, nothing, no one. That was when I decided to stop early and make camp. I found a relatively flat patch of ground with decent visibility in all directions. I didn't want to be near cliffs or creeks. I wanted to see if anything or anyone was moving around. I set up my tent facing the slope I'd come down from and gathered some dry wood for a fire. I didn't usually build one, but that night I wanted the light. I kept it small and smokeless. Again, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing footsteps. They were faint, distant, but steady, like someone walking through the brush, starting and stopping. I lay in my sleeping bag with my headlamp ready and the emergency beacon beside me. I never used it, but I thought about it. At some point in the early morning, maybe around 4 a.m., the footsteps stopped, and I slept. When I woke up, everything felt off. The fire had gone out completely. The air was heavy and still. I stepped out and looked around. No sign of anything, but something was gone. The gloves. I had placed them beside a tree near my tent before going to sleep. Now they were gone. That was enough for me. I packed everything fast and got moving. I didn't eat. I didn't care about the rest of the trail. I just wanted to get back to the car. The hike back took most of the day. I stayed on the map and kept checking the GPS, making sure I didn't veer off. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't stop for anything. When I reached the trailhead, my car was still there, alone, untouched, but there were fresh prints in the dirt beside it. Just the right foot, all the way around the vehicle. I got in, locked the doors, and drove back to the main road without stopping once. I didn't look in the rear view. I didn't breathe right until I was halfway down the mountain. I never reported anything. Who would I tell? What would I say? All I know is something or someone was out there. Something that didn't leave pairs of prints. Something that didn't need conversation or warnings. Just presence. And I don't hike alone anymore. I had been planning the hike for months. It was supposed to be a simple trip. Just me and the wilderness. No distractions, no phone signal, just a few days alone in the forest. I liked to hike alone. Cleared my head and gave me a sense of control over something unpredictable. This time, I chose a remote trail in the northern part of the state, a place known for its thick forests, rocky ridges, and winding streams. I had been there once before, but only for a few hours. This time, I intended to go deep and camp at least 2 nights. The plan was simple: hike in, set camp, explore a bit, then hike out. I packed carefully: food for 3 days, extra water purification tablets, a sturdy tent, good boots, and all my usual gear. The day I started, the sky was clear and the air cool but not cold. It was early morning, the kind of morning that felt fresh and new, with dew still hanging on the leaves and a soft mist rolling over the ground. I slipped on my backpack, took a last deep breath, and began. The trailhead was easy to find. A small dirt path off a gravel road that disappeared quickly under thick bushes and tall pines. The first hours went by quickly, the rhythm of walking familiar and steady. My boots crunched on fallen needles and dry leaves. Birds sang above, and the occasional squirrel darted across the path. The smell of pine and damp earth filled my nose. I stopped often to take photos or just look around, drinking in the quiet beauty of the forest. After about 4 hours, the trail started to climb. The trees thinned, revealing rocky outcrops and small cliffs. The wind picked up here, cooler and sharper, blowing through the branches with a steady whistle. I felt my legs burning with effort as I pulled myself up steeper slopes, using roots and rocks to steady myself. The sun was high now, filtering down in bright shafts that created patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. I found a small clearing with a view of the valley below and sat to eat my lunch, a sandwich and some trail mix. The view was worth the climb, endless green waves of trees stretching far in every direction, broken only by the thin blue ribbon of a river far down. I rested for a while, listening to the wind and the distant call of a hawk. After lunch, I continued along the ridge, following the narrow path that twisted between rocks and shrubs. The trail was less worn here, and I had to be careful with each step. Loose stones and slippery moss made the footing tricky. As the afternoon wore on, I noticed the sky starting to change. Clouds gathered quickly, thickening and darkening, turning a dull gray. A cold drop of rain hit my cheek, then another. I pulled my rain jacket out and zipped it up just as the first real rain began. A steady patter that grew stronger by the minute. The wind picked up even more, bending the trees and sending leaves swirling in chaotic dances. I knew I had to find shelter soon. I wasn't too far from my planned campsite, but the trail here was confusing. Signs were few and old, faded by years of sun and weather. The rain blurred my vision, making everything slick and slippery. I slowed my pace, scanning the ground and the trail markers, trying not to lose my way. The path twisted left, then right, dipping into a shallow valley where the trees grew thicker and the underbrush denser. My boots sank into soft mud, and my legs grew tired and cold. The rain was relentless now, drumming on my jacket and dripping down my neck. I hated hiking in the rain. It made everything harder and less safe. Suddenly, my foot slipped on a moss-covered rock. I stumbled forward but caught myself against a tree. Heart pounding, I took a moment to steady my breath. Then I realized something. I had lost the trail. The path wasn't visible anywhere, just thick bushes and trees all around. I scanned in all directions but found nothing that looked like the trail. I checked my map and compass. The map was wet and creased but still usable. I tried to orient myself, but the dense trees and the rain made it hard to see landmarks. The compass needle spun slightly as I moved but seemed to point roughly east. I decided to try walking east, hoping to find the trail or some sign of the campsite. The forest here was thick, with undergrowth that grabbed at my legs and branches that scraped my face. The rain soaked me through, chilling me to the bone despite my jacket. I moved slowly, careful not to trip. Every step felt heavier. Time passed. The light dimmed as clouds thickened. I checked my watch. Only an hour had passed, but it felt like longer. I kept moving, pushing through bushes and stepping over fallen logs. Then I heard something, a soft rustle close by but not on the trail. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, a deer, a rabbit, or maybe a bird disturbed by my passing. But the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin like cold fingers. I decided to stop for a while, thinking I might hear the rain lighten or find the trail by daylight. I took off my pack and sat on a wet log. The rain blurred my vision, water running down my face. I pulled out my emergency blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders. It did little to stop the cold. I drank some water, ate a small snack, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. But then the rustling came again, louder this time, closer, like something moving through the bushes a few meters away. I stood up quickly, heart pounding. The forest around me was silent except for the rain and the occasional creak of tree limbs in the wind. I thought about shouting, but there was no one to hear me. No help anywhere nearby. My phone was dead, the battery had died hours ago, and there was no signal anyway. I felt completely alone. The rustling stopped again, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was following me or waiting. I picked up my pack, tightened the straps, and tried to think clearly. I decided to move again, hoping to find the trail or some shelter. I walked carefully, eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something up ahead, an old wooden signpost, half fallen and covered in moss. Relief flooded through me. I moved faster, following the direction the sign pointed. It was the right way. After a few more minutes, the trail reappeared, muddy and slick but unmistakable. I dropped to my knees and touched the ground, feeling the solid dirt underfoot. I was back on track, but the relief was short-lived. The trail led downhill now, steep and treacherous. My legs were trembling with exhaustion, but I pushed forward. The rain had turned into a heavy drizzle now, softening but still cold. I reached a small creek crossing, water rushing fast over rocks. The makeshift bridge was gone. Just 2 fallen logs laid across the water, slick and unstable. I tested the logs carefully, placing each foot slowly. Halfway across, one log shifted slightly, and I froze, heart racing. I balanced carefully and made it across without falling. On the other side, the forest opened up into a small clearing. I could see my planned campsite not far ahead, a flat area surrounded by tall trees, with a fire ring and a place to pitch a tent. Hope surged in me. I hurried forward, eager to set up shelter before night fell. When I arrived, the campsite was empty, just as I had hoped. I dropped my pack and started setting up the tent. My hands were numb from cold and wet, but I worked quickly, driving stakes into the soft ground and securing the rainfly tightly. Once the tent was up, I gathered dry wood from under the trees, sheltered from the rain. Starting a fire was harder than usual. The wood was damp, and the wind kept blowing the smoke in my face. After several attempts and using some dry kindling I had packed, I finally got a small flame going. The fire gave me warmth and light, and for the first time in hours, I felt safe. I cooked some dinner on my small stove, eating slowly as I watched the flames dance. The forest around me was quiet now except for the soft patter of rain and the crackling of the fire. I checked my gear again, making sure everything was dry and secure. I planned my next day carefully, hoping the weather would clear and I could hike out without problems. As night fell, the forest became darker, the trees looming like silent giants. The sounds of the night, frogs, insects, and distant owls, filled the air. I lay in my tent, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening to the rain and my own breathing. My mind kept replaying the day's events. The lost trail, the rustling sounds, the cold fear creeping under my skin. I forced myself to think logically, to remember that I was safe now, that I had survived and found shelter. But sleep was hard to come by. Every little noise made me jump. I kept imagining shadows moving just outside the tent, something watching me from the dark. I reminded myself that the forest was full of animals. Deer, raccoons, maybe even a bear. I had packed bear spray and kept food sealed tightly, but the fear didn't fully go away. I finally drifted off to a fitful sleep, waking several times through the night. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was a pale gray, and It started as a weekend plan to get away from work and noise. I live in a small apartment in the city, and I work from home most days. Even though that sounds peaceful, it can get really cramped and dull after a while. I hadn't done anything outdoors in a long time, so I picked a random trail I found online. It was in a forested area about 3 hours away by car, in a quiet part of the state. It wasn't very popular, and that's what drew me in. I just wanted some peace, maybe a long hike through trees, a couple nights in my tent, and no buzzing phones or voices around me. I packed up my gear the day before. I double-checked my tent, my sleeping bag, food, stove, flashlight, power bank, clothes, and all the usual stuff. I made sure I had a paper map and a compass too. I also brought a backup GPS that runs on batteries just in case. I'd read enough stories to know not to count on just your phone. The forecast said clear skies for the next 4 days, and I planned to be out for 3. I left early Friday morning and reached the trailhead around 9 a.m. There was no one else parked there, just a dirt patch at the end of a narrow road, surrounded by thick trees and silence. It felt good to be away from everything. I locked up my car, strapped on my pack, and started walking. The trail was mostly flat in the beginning, just damp earth and pine needles underfoot, and thick green on either side. The air smelled of moss and wood. As I went deeper, the trail thinned and twisted, with tree roots and rocks jutting out. It was quiet, but not in a creepy way. Birds chirped now and then. The sun came through the branches in thin beams. I stopped to take a few photos, but mostly just kept walking. I walked for several hours and covered a good stretch of trail. I passed a few faded trail markers nailed to trees. Some were almost hidden under moss. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a clearing by a small creek, and I decided to make camp there. The sound of the water was calming, and the spot was flat and dry. I set up my tent, boiled some water for dinner, and just sat there, enjoying the quiet. As it got dark, the temperature dropped. I crawled into my sleeping bag and fell asleep fast. The first night was uneventful. I woke up rested and packed up early the next morning. My plan was to hike deeper into the trail loop, camp again the next night, then head back the third day. I followed the trail past the creek, crossed a wooden footbridge, and hiked uphill for a while. The trees got denser and the trail less maintained. I started noticing that the markers were more faded now, and some were missing. I had to stop often to check my map and compass. It wasn't too concerning yet, but I made a mental note to keep track of landmarks. Midway through the second day, I got the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't anything I saw or heard. It was just a shift in the air. The forest seemed quieter. No birds, no rustling. Even my own footsteps sounded different. I told myself it was probably just in my head. Sometimes when you're alone in the woods for too long, your brain starts playing tricks. I kept walking, but the trail started to disappear. It wasn't sudden. It just faded. One moment I was on packed dirt with old footprints, and the next I was stepping over rocks and through thick brush with no clear path. I pulled out my map, found a high point nearby, and climbed up to see if I could get my bearings. From up there, I could see the treetops stretch for miles. No signs of roads or cabins or smoke, just green and more green. I checked my GPS. The signal was faint, and the reading didn't match my map. I turned it off to save the battery and trusted my compass instead. I figured I'd backtrack. That's when I realized I wasn't sure where I came from. Everything looked the same. I tried following what I thought was my path, but after half an hour I hit a steep drop I didn't remember crossing. I turned around, went another way, and found a tree with a broken branch I recognized. Relief washed over me. I was sure I'd passed it earlier. I kept going. Then I saw another tree that looked just like the first one. Same broken branch. I thought maybe I'd walked in a circle. I forced myself to slow down. Panicking would make it worse. I found a flat spot under a big tree, dropped my pack, and sat. I drank some water, ate a snack, and looked at the map again. I decided to stay put for an hour and rest. Maybe retracing steps with a clear head would help. But as I sat there, I started noticing things that made my stomach twist. I spotted a footprint near my pack that didn't match my boot. It looked older and half-covered, but it was definitely a different shape. A little wider, maybe a different tread. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't seen anyone since I started the hike. I told myself it could have been from weeks ago. Trails aren't always empty. Still, I packed up quickly and decided to walk a different direction. I pushed through brush for an hour, hoping to hit the stream again. I didn't. I found a stretch of forest that looked untouched. No path, no litter, nothing human. Just thick undergrowth, fallen logs, and old trees. I checked my GPS again. Dead. Battery must have drained fast from the weak signal earlier. My phone had a little juice, but no bars. I shut it off. That second night, I had no choice but to camp where I was. I cleared a small patch, set up my tent, and boiled water for a quick meal. The forest felt different. Every sound made me freeze. I kept thinking of that footprint. I didn't see any animals all day, not even squirrels. The woods were dead silent. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking up to soft noises, snaps of twigs, light crunches. I told myself it was wind or a rabbit, but my nerves wouldn't calm down. At some point, I thought I heard breathing outside the tent. Slow, steady breathing. I held my own breath and listened. It stopped. I waited, then nothing. I stayed still for what felt like hours. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was barely light out. The air was cold, and there was dew on everything. I stepped out of the tent, and my heart dropped. There was a small rock stacked on top of another right in front of the entrance. It wasn't there the night before. I know it wasn't. I don't do the stacking thing some hikers do. This wasn't a natural stack either. It was deliberate, balanced. I didn't touch it. I packed up fast and started moving. That whole day, I pushed through forest without knowing where I was going. I followed the sun and aimed west, hoping to cross a road or another trail. I kept glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was behind me. I saw no one, but I kept feeling watched. The trees felt tighter, like they were leaning in. My mind started going to places I didn't want it to go. I told myself I just needed to keep moving. I hiked all day with barely any rest. Late in the afternoon, I heard something that nearly made me cry with relief. A distant humming sound, faint but real. I followed it, stumbling through branches and uneven ground. After an hour, I broke through the trees and found a dirt road. Not a trail, an actual road. No cars, but it was something man-made. I followed the road west, praying it led somewhere. After a few miles, I saw a rusty sign nailed to a tree. The letters were faded, but I could make out the name of a town I'd passed on the drive-in. That meant I was somewhere on the old service road network used by rangers and fire crews. I kept going. Just before dark, I saw a parked pickup truck in the distance. I waved my arms and ran. No one was inside, but it had a license plate and gear in the bed. I waited nearby for a while, and after about an hour, a man showed up carrying a chainsaw and wearing safety gear. He was part of a clearing crew for fire breaks. He was surprised to see me, said this stretch of road hadn't been used in weeks. I explained what happened, and he offered me water and a ride to the nearest ranger station. I didn't tell him everything. I left out the rock and the breathing. I didn't want to sound crazy. At the station, they looked at my map and said I'd somehow gone miles off the main trail way past the marked loop. They said it happens sometimes. People get turned around, especially on old trails that haven't been maintained. I nodded and kept most of my thoughts to myself. I slept at a motel that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had followed me those 2 days. The footprint, the stacked rock, the missing animals, the breathing, but there was no proof, just my word. I told myself it could have been another hiker, maybe a survivalist living off-grid, or maybe my brain, worn thin by stress and silence, imagined it all. I don't know, but I haven't hiked alone since. I still think about it sometimes, especially at night. And if I ever go out again, it'll be on a busy trail with friends and maybe even a guide. Because no matter how peaceful the forest looks, you really don't know what's out there, or who's watching when you're all alone. I had planned the hike for weeks. The mountain ridge was known among locals for its breathtaking views and quiet trails, but it wasn't a busy spot, especially in late autumn. I wanted the peace, the solitude, and a chance to push myself physically. The weather forecast was good. Clear skies, mild temperature, perfect hiking conditions. I packed my bag carefully the night before, extra layers, plenty of water, snacks, a first aid kit, my map, compass, and a fully charged phone with a portable battery. I left early that morning before dawn. The trailhead was easy to find, just off a small gravel road that wound through pine forests and rocky outcrops. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a couple of cars I didn't recognize. I tightened my boots, slung my pack on, and started walking just as the first pale light touched the treetops. The air was crisp, and each breath felt fresh and cold. Leaves rustled softly underfoot, a mix of pine needles, dry leaves, and little stones. The trail was narrow but well-marked, lined by tall trees, mostly pines and oaks. The scent of damp earth mixed with pine sap filled the air. As I walked, I focused on the rhythm of my steps, the steady rise and fall of my breath, the occasional bird call that echoed through the forest. The first few miles were easy. The trail wound gently upward. I passed patches of wild berries, some still clinging to the bushes despite the season. Small critters darted in the underbrush, chipmunks, squirrels. I stopped a few times to drink water and eat a little. I checked the map and compass regularly to keep my bearings. No cell signal yet, which was normal this far in. Around midday, the trail became steeper. The trees thinned out and were replaced by rocky ledges and sparse bushes. The wind picked up, cooler now and sharper. I pulled my jacket tighter around me and pressed on. The ridge was close, I could feel it in the air, and I was excited to reach the top. That's when things started to change. The trail markers grew less frequent, and the path became less clear. I slowed down and scanned carefully. I knew I hadn't taken a wrong turn. My compass confirmed the direction, but the ground was uneven, and the wind rattled the bare branches above me. The sky had shifted, too, growing gray and overcast much faster than I expected. I looked at the clouds gathering and made a mental note to keep moving. I didn't want to be caught in bad weather up high. I walked more carefully now, each step deliberate. The rocky path was slippery with damp moss and fallen leaves. I kept glancing behind me. Sometimes the woods seemed quieter than they should be. No birds, no rustling, just an eerie stillness. It made me uneasy, but I shook the feeling off. I told myself it was normal. Forests have quiet patches. About an hour later, I reached a fork in the trail. One path veered sharply downhill toward a small valley. The other climbed a little higher along the ridge. The map showed the ridge trail continuing toward the summit, but I noticed some footprints in the dirt on the downward trail. They looked fresh. Maybe someone had gone that way recently. Part of me wanted to follow the footprints, just to be sure I wasn't missing anything important. But I stuck to the ridge trail. That decision weighed on me later. The ridge trail soon led me out into an open area, rocky, windswept, with jagged stones and scraggly bushes. The wind was relentless here, pushing hard against me. I crouched behind a boulder to catch my breath and check my supplies. My phone still had no signal. The sky was darker now, clouds heavy and low. I pulled out my rain jacket and put it on. Then I heard it, a low rumbling noise, not thunder, more like a deep growl but distant and muffled. I froze, trying to pinpoint where it came from. The wind made it hard to tell. I looked around but saw nothing. The ridge stretched on both ways, rocky and barren, with sharp drop-offs on either side. The noise came again, closer this time. My heart rate jumped. I scanned the rocky outcrops and trees for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the cold wind and the darkening sky. I considered turning back. The weather was clearly shifting for the worse, and something about that sound made me nervous. I didn't know what it was. Maybe an animal? Bears lived in this area, but they usually avoided people. Then I caught sight of movement, just out of the corner of my eye. Something big moving between the rocks below the ridge, too large to be a deer or a smaller animal. My mind raced. A bear? A mountain lion? Neither made me feel safe. I remembered the stories about how these animals can be dangerous when cornered or surprised. I decided to keep moving, faster this time, along the ridge toward the summit. I hoped the higher elevation would give me a better view and a safer vantage point. The wind whipped harder, and the first drops of rain started. Small at first, then heavier. The clouds opened up and a cold rain soaked me quickly despite my jacket. The trail became slick with mud and wet rocks. My boots lost grip several times, forcing me to catch myself on nearby trees or rocks. I was alone, cold, and tired. I tried to ignore the anxiety gnawing at my gut. The growling sound had stopped, but I knew it hadn't gone far. I reached the summit just as the rain slowed. The view was incredible even in the gray light. Mountains rolled out in all directions, forests and valleys stretching far below. But I couldn't enjoy it. My thoughts were on getting down safely. I checked my map again. The descent would be steep and tricky, but the sun might break through later. I decided to start down quickly. The path down was narrow and uneven. My muscles ached, my feet were sore. The rain made the rocks treacherous. I slipped once, catching myself just in time, but it rattled me badly. About halfway down, I heard the growl again, closer and more urgent. I stopped dead and looked around. The forest edge below the ridge was thick, and I caught movement. Large, heavy steps pushing through brush. I stood frozen, heart pounding. The animal was close now, and it was following me. Panic surged. I thought about climbing a tree, but the closest ones were thin and not very tall. I could try to outrun it, but I knew I was slower on the slippery trail. I slowed my breathing, trying to stay calm. I remembered what I'd read about encounters with bears or large predators. Don't run, make yourself look bigger, make noise. I started clapping loudly, banging a trekking pole against a rock. The growling turned to a low roar. Branches snapped somewhere nearby. I kept moving downhill steadily, making noise and looking for a safer spot. Eventually, I reached a wider area where the trail crossed a small stream. I crossed carefully and found a large fallen log. I climbed on top and sat, catching my breath and trying to listen. The growling faded. I waited, tense and alert. After a long minute, I heard nothing but the rain dripping from leaves. Slowly, I got down and moved on, more cautiously. My pace was slow and steady. I kept my trekking poles ready, my eyes scanning every movement. Eventually, the forest opened back to the main trail. I recognized it immediately. A few more miles and I'd be back at the trailhead. Safe. The rain stopped entirely. The clouds began to break. The last few miles were long, but uneventful. I finally saw the parking lot, my car, and the empty gravel road leading away. Relief washed over me, but I didn't celebrate. I knew how close I had come to a real danger out there. The wilderness was beautiful, yes, but also wild and unpredictable. When I got home, I checked the local news and talked to park rangers online. They confirmed reports of a large black bear roaming the ridge area, unusually active and aggressive. People were warned to avoid the area for a while. I was lucky. Careful preparation, staying calm, and respecting the wild made all the difference. That day, I learned that nature isn't just a place for adventure. It demands respect and caution. And sometimes, even when you think you're ready, it can surprise you in ways you never expected. I always loved being in the forest. Not the short, well-marked trail kind of forest, but the kind where it's just trees and silence and the occasional sound of a squirrel scurrying over dry leaves. I liked to hike alone, not because I didn't have friends, but because being out there by myself made me feel like I was really part of something old and untouched. I could clear my head, move at my own pace, and not worry about small talk. It was mid-September when I took a few days off work to hike through a forest in northern Idaho. The plan was to go out for 3 days and loop back around to where I left my car at a trailhead near a place called Dewberry Creek. It wasn't a popular trail. There was a signpost at the entrance, but it was weather-worn. The map behind the plastic panel faded almost white from the sun. I'd found the trail on a backcountry forum online. It had good reviews from serious hikers, long, quiet, and barely used. That's what I wanted. I had my pack, my GPS, enough food and water for 4 days, and I always carried a knife, bear spray, and a basic first aid kit. I left early in the morning, the kind of morning where the sky's still pink and the grass is wet enough to soak your boots by noon. The first few hours were quiet. The trail was mostly soft dirt, some moss, a lot of ferns. The forest was thick with pine and spruce, and even though I was technically on a trail, it didn't feel like it. Branches reached across the path, some parts nearly choked by brush, and I had to duck under fallen logs more than once. By the afternoon, I'd covered a good chunk of ground. My legs were tired, but the good kind of tired, the kind you feel when you know your body's doing what it's supposed to. I set up camp near a small stream, just enough water running to refill my bottles after filtering. I pitched my tent, ate some dried fruit and jerky, and sat with my back against a tree until the light drained from the sky. There were no fire bans that week, so I made a small one, kept it controlled, and sat beside it as the night settled in. I didn't sleep well that night. I wasn't scared or anything, just restless. The forest gets loud when you're trying to sleep. Frogs, bugs, the occasional distant coyote. Every now and then, I'd hear something crunch or snap outside the tent, but I chalked it up to deer. It's always deer. The next morning, I woke up early. I packed quickly and continued deeper into the forest. The trail grew steeper and thinner. At some points, it disappeared completely under dead leaves and branches. I followed the GPS and the old blazes marked on trees. Some were so faded they looked more like scars than markers. I walked in silence for hours, stopping only to drink or adjust my boots. Sometime in the early afternoon, maybe around 2, I got the feeling. It wasn't anything I could explain. It just felt like something had shifted, like the forest was too quiet all of a sudden, like I wasn't alone anymore. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing, just wind moving through the trees. I looked behind me and saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still, the feeling stayed with me. I kept walking. Every so often, I'd stop suddenly, hoping to catch some sign, movement, sound, but I got nothing. No birds, no animals, no wind. Just the weight of the trees pressing in on all sides. About an hour later, I saw something that made my stomach turn. It was a boot print on the trail behind me. That might not sound strange in itself, but the tread wasn't mine. I knew what my own boots looked like. This one was wider and had a different sole pattern. At first, I thought maybe I'd passed someone without realizing. Maybe they'd come in from a side trail, but I hadn't seen any splits or junctions. The more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. I kept walking, quicker now, constantly looking back. Every so often, I'd see another boot print. Sometimes it looked fresh, like it had been made minutes before. Once, I found one that was so close to mine it almost overlapped it. I didn't hear anyone. I didn't see anyone, but I knew someone was behind me. At some point, I stepped off the trail. I moved about 100 feet into the brush and crouched down. I sat completely still, hiding behind a fallen log. I stayed there for what felt like an hour, listening. Nothing. Then I heard it, leaves crunching. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They were trying to be quiet. I didn't move. My heart was pounding. The steps got closer, then stopped. I didn't hear anything for a long time. Then I heard the sound of someone exhaling. A quick breath, sharp and quiet. Then more silence. Eventually, the steps moved off again, heading further up the trail. I waited another 20 minutes before crawling back to the trail. I looked in the direction the steps had gone. I didn't see anyone. I moved in the opposite direction. I decided not to finish the loop. Instead, I aimed to cut through the forest and head back toward the direction of the road, using my GPS to guide me. It would add a day, maybe more, depending on the terrain, but I didn't want to keep heading deeper into the woods. That night, I didn't make camp. I kept walking until after dark, using my headlamp, making my way slowly through thick brush and uneven ground. I finally stopped around midnight. I set up my tent in a low clearing and didn't light a fire. I didn't eat. I barely drank. I just sat inside the tent with the bear spray in one hand and my knife in the other. Every time I heard a twig snap, I froze. I barely slept. At one point, I thought I heard something brush against the outside of the tent, but when I opened the flap, nothing was there. By morning, I was exhausted but alive. I packed up quickly and started hiking again. My GPS was still working, though the signal was weak in places. I moved slowly, avoiding open spaces, sticking close to thick clusters of trees. Around midday, I found what looked like an old logging road, overgrown but still passable. I followed it for miles. It led roughly in the direction of the main highway. I knew I was getting closer to civilization when I saw an old barbed wire fence, rusted and partially collapsed. I stepped over it and kept moving. Eventually, I came to a gravel road, and not long after that, I heard a car in the distance. I never saw whoever was following me. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe they were a hunter. Maybe someone living off-grid who didn't want to be found. Maybe worse. I didn't stick around to find out. When I got back to the car, it was still there, untouched. I got in and drove for nearly 2 hours before stopping at a gas station. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Not really. But I did change. I don't hike alone anymore. I still love the forest, but I'm not the same out there. Now I look over my shoulder more. I pay attention to every print, every sound, and I never, ever ignore that feeling in my gut again. I had been planning a solo hiking trip for months. Life had felt like a never-ending loop lately, and I just wanted to step away from the noise. Work, city traffic, people, phone notifications, it had all become too much. I craved silence. I needed to feel like a person again, not just someone going through the motions. I picked a trail I found online. It wasn't too far from the city, about a 6-hour drive, and not extremely popular, which was exactly what I wanted. I read that it was part of an old logging road that had been converted into a hiking trail. The place was remote but manageable for someone with decent experience. I packed up my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, water filters, first aid, knife, flashlight, backup batteries, GPS, and a map, and took off on a Friday morning. The plan was to hike in for a day and a half, find a quiet spot near a lake shown on the map, stay for 2 nights, then hike back the way I came. The drive to the trailhead was mostly smooth. I saw fewer cars the closer I got, and by the time I turned onto the dirt road leading to the trailhead, there wasn't another soul in sight. That's how I wanted it. It was early afternoon when I parked my car. I double-checked my gear, locked the vehicle, and started walking. The trail was peaceful. I heard nothing but my boots against the earth, the occasional chirp of birds, and the wind playing in the trees. The air smelled clean. There was no service here, which made me feel both nervous and free. For the first hour or two, everything was smooth. The path was slightly overgrown, but nothing difficult. I had marked a few spots on my map and had my GPS for backup. I passed an old broken sign that looked like it had once marked a fork in the trail. One direction was the lake, the other pointed toward an abandoned fire lookout tower, according to the map. I stuck with the lake path, which curved west and down a bit into a valley. The sun had started dipping behind the trees when I found a flat area to set up my tent. It wasn't the lake yet, but I figured I had enough time to reach it the next day. That night was cold. I heard some animal sounds, nothing alarming, just the usual stuff like owls and rustling. I had a small fire going, made some food, and sat watching the flames until I got tired. When I crawled into my sleeping bag, I felt good, tired, sore in that satisfying way, and finally away from everything. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound that didn't fit the forest. It was faint, like a soft metallic clinking. I sat up, heart already racing. I held my breath, listening. After a minute, it stopped. I told myself it was probably something small, like a raccoon knocking into my pot or something falling from a tree. I stayed up for another half hour before laying back down. I left my headlamp close, just in case. The next morning was colder than I expected. There was a thin layer of frost on the ground. I made some coffee, packed up, and continued toward the lake. The trail narrowed and started climbing again. I checked the GPS often since the path was less obvious now. After about 4 hours, I reached the lake. It was completely still, surrounded by dense forest and rock walls on the far side. I didn't see any signs of recent human activity. It was beautiful. I set up camp near the lake's edge and walked around to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it, a set of footprints. They weren't mine. These were older, partially filled in with dirt and pine needles, but still visible. They looked like boot prints, wide and heavy, like from a work boot. I counted them. They came from the direction of the old fire tower path and ended at the lake. But there were no return prints. I felt a chill crawl up my back. I stood there for a while, just looking. I knew hikers came through occasionally, so I tried to brush it off. I went back to my tent, started a small fire again, and cooked. The sun set quickly behind the tree line, and I was left with the sound of water lapping against the shore. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, thinking I heard something. A twig snapping, water moving. At one point, I thought I heard the same faint clinking sound from the night before. This time, it sounded farther away, but it still didn't sit right with me. I turned on my headlamp and scanned the area around my tent. Nothing, but I didn't go back to sleep after that. To first light, I decided to pack up and start heading back. I had planned to stay another night, but something felt off. I didn't want to be out here longer than I had to. The air was still and heavy, and the forest seemed quieter than before. I started walking fast, trying to make it as far as I could before the afternoon. About 2 hours into the hike, I noticed something odd. A tree had been marked. It looked like someone had taken a knife and carved a wide slash into the bark recently. I didn't remember seeing that on the way in. About a mile later, I saw another one, then another. They weren't on the main path either. They were just off to the side, but close enough to see. I told myself again it could be anything. Maybe a ranger marking trees, maybe another hiker. Still, it made me feel watched. Then I saw it. A shape way up the slope to my right. It was standing behind a tree, far enough away that I couldn't make out anything specific. I froze. I stared. The shape didn't move. I slowly stepped backward down the trail, not turning my back to it. After a few seconds, it was gone, just vanished between the trees. I didn't hear it move. No footsteps, no branches snapping, just gone. I started moving faster, borderline jogging. I kept looking behind me. My heart was pounding. The trail felt unfamiliar even though I knew I was going the right way. Everything looked the same. Pine trees, dirt, moss, silence. About 3 hours from my car, I reached a part of the trail that had clearly been disturbed. Dirt was kicked up, sticks broken. It looked like someone had been walking off the path. The footprints were fresh. Boot prints again, big and deep. I saw at least 4 different prints heading in the same direction I was going. I didn't stop to analyze them. I just kept walking. I stopped drinking water to avoid needing to pee. I didn't stop for food. I pushed my body hard, telling myself I could rest in the car. The last mile felt like a nightmare. My legs were shaking. I kept hearing something behind me, just far enough back that I couldn't see anything. I kept turning around but saw nothing. No animals, no people, just that horrible silence. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I almost cried. I rushed down the last slope and nearly dropped my pack trying to find the keys. I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat there. My hands were shaking. I didn't start the engine right away. I stared back at the trail for a long time. I didn't see anything. No one followed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there the whole time, just far enough to stay hidden. The drive back was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror. Every time I saw headlights behind me, my stomach turned. When I finally reached home, I locked every door and closed every curtain. I didn't unpack that night. I didn't sleep. The next day, I reported what I saw to the local ranger station. I didn't know what else to do. I told them about the footprints, the strange sounds, the figure in the woods. They listened politely, took some notes, said they would check it out. I don't know if they ever did. I still hike, but I don't go alone anymore. And I avoid trails that don't have a steady flow of people. That trip changed something in me. It made me realize how alone we really are out there, and how easy it would be for someone to disappear without a trace. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was someone real. That's what scares me the most. The woods are quiet, yes, but sometimes something else is in that silence with you, and you might not know it until it's too late. I had been planning this hike for weeks. The trail was supposed to be remote, a path less traveled, deep in the mountains. I needed time away from everything, away from noise and people. The idea was simple. I'd pack light, move fast, and spend 2 days alone in the wilderness, just me and the trail. I'd done solo hikes before, but nothing this long or remote. The morning started clear and cool, the kind of fresh air that fills your lungs like cold water. I was excited but careful. I checked my gear twice: backpack, water, food, map, compass, first aid kit, shoes tied tight. I set off early, the sun just breaking over the peaks, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was quiet except for birds and the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and twigs. The trail was narrow and winding, sometimes barely visible under fallen leaves and pine needles. I liked that. I liked the feeling of getting lost in the woods, where the world shrinks to just the trees and the ground beneath your feet. I followed the map closely, stopping often to check landmarks. A large rock here, a bend in the creek there. By midday, I reached a clearing with a small pond. The water was still and dark, reflecting the sky like glass. I sat on a log, eating a sandwich and drinking water. The air smelled of pine and earth. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I scanned the horizon. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks jagged and dusted with snow. I didn't see anyone else on the trail all day. No other hikers, no signs of human activity except for the worn path. That's what I liked, being alone. I moved carefully, making sure to leave no trace. I wanted to camp near a stream I'd found marked on the map, about 4 miles further. The sun was starting to dip, turning the sky a soft orange. I had to hurry. The trail became steeper and rockier as I climbed higher. My legs burned with effort, but I welcomed the challenge. The air thinned, making each breath harder. I paused often, catching my breath and drinking water. I could hear the rush of the stream ahead. The sound gave me hope I was close. Then I noticed the trail was getting harder to follow. The path was faint, covered with fallen branches and leaves. I stopped and checked my map and compass again. The stream should be right nearby, but all I saw were trees, thick and tangled. I pushed forward slowly, eyes scanning for any sign of the path. After 10 minutes, I realized I had made a wrong turn. The terrain didn't match my map. I stopped and looked around. There was no clear trail, just dense forest all around me. My heart started to beat faster. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I could use my compass and backtrack, but that meant going downhill in the dark. I wasn't sure which way to go. I decided to climb higher, hoping to find a better vantage point. I scrambled up a rocky slope, careful with each step. The forest thinned a little, and I found a large boulder to climb onto. From there, I could see the valley below. The sunset was almost gone, and shadows stretched long. I spotted a thin line that looked like a trail far down the slope. Relieved, I started to climb down carefully, heading toward that line. My hands and feet slipped on loose stones, and I had to stop several times to avoid falling. The sun set completely, and the forest grew dark quickly. I pulled out my flashlight, but it was weak. The batteries had started to die earlier, but I hadn't thought it was a big deal. Now, in the dark, I realized how dangerous it was. I kept moving toward the trail, but the night brought a thick silence that was harder to ignore. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves made me jump. I kept telling myself it was just animals, nothing to worry about. But the darkness played tricks on me. Shadows shifted, and shapes seemed to move at the edge of my vision. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the trail. It was narrow and faint, but definitely the right one. I followed it downhill, hoping to reach the stream and set up camp before I got too tired. The forest was dense, and the beam of my flashlight barely cut through the gloom. Suddenly, I heard a low growl, deep and guttural. I froze. The sound came from behind some bushes to my right. My heart slammed in my chest. I tried to stay calm and slowly turned my flashlight in that direction. Nothing, just dark shapes and shadows. The growl came again, closer this time, more threatening. I didn't have time to think. I picked up my pace, stepping faster on the uneven ground, trying not to make noise but desperate to put distance between me and whatever was there. The growling faded, but I stayed alert, scanning constantly. I reached the stream just as my legs started to give out. The water was icy cold but clear. I drank quickly and found a spot nearby to pitch my tent. The ground was uneven, but the only place flat enough to sleep. I worked quickly, hands shaking, knowing I had little time before exhaustion took over. Once the tent was up, I crawled inside and zipped it closed, wrapping myself in the sleeping bag. I kept my flashlight and knife close. The night outside was alive with sounds. Insects, the wind in the trees, distant animal calls. I told myself I was safe now, but the memory of the growl wouldn't leave me. Sleep didn't come easy. Every small noise made me tense up. I listened for footsteps, rustling, anything unusual. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke suddenly to a loud noise outside, something heavy crashing through the bushes. I froze, heart racing. The tent shook slightly. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it outside. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness. A large bear stood just a few feet from my tent, sniffing the air. I stayed still, remembering what I had read about bear encounters. Don't run, don't make sudden moves. The bear grunted and shifted its weight, clearly interested in me or my camp. My mind raced. I had no bear spray, no way to defend myself other than my knife. I tried to stay calm, breathing slowly. The bear sniffed around the tent, then moved on, disappearing into the woods with a final grunt. I waited for a long time before I dared to move, heart pounding hard. The encounter left me shaken but relieved it hadn't been worse. The next morning, I broke camp early and followed the trail back down. I stayed alert, looking for signs of animals or anything unusual. The daylight made everything seem less threatening, but I still felt the weight of what happened the night before. I made it back to my car late that afternoon, tired, sore, but safe. The hike had tested me in ways I didn't expect. The wilderness was beautiful and harsh. No stories of ghosts or monsters, just real dangers that demand respect and caution. The trailhead was quieter than I expected when I pulled up early in the morning. I had chosen a relatively unknown section of forest for my solo hike, far from popular trails and busy weekends. The sun was barely up, and a cool, damp mist still clung to the trees and the ground. The air smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and moss, felt fresh and untouched, the kind of place I had been craving for weeks. I wanted to be alone with nature, to push myself out of my comfort zone, to test my limits. I packed light, but with enough to survive at least a day or two. Water, some trail mix, an emergency blanket, a small first aid kit, a map, a compass, and my phone, although I knew signal would be spotty deep in the woods. My boots were laced tight, and my backpack settled comfortably on my shoulders. The first steps on the dirt path felt good. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and every footstep made a faint sucking sound as my boots pressed into the earth. The trail wound through thick trees, mostly pines and some scattered oaks. The forest floor was a tangle of roots, fallen branches, and patches of bright green moss. Here and there, small wildflowers peeked through the undergrowth, delicate and quiet. I could hear birds somewhere above, hidden from view, calling to each other in quick bursts. The sound was cheerful and alive. I kept a steady pace, following the markers painted on trees, small white rectangles spaced every few feet. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, and in places it was overgrown with brambles and tall grass. I stopped often to catch my breath and to drink water. The air was cool but humid, and my shirt clung to my back as sweat began to build. After a couple of hours, I reached a clearing. It was small, maybe the size of a backyard, surrounded by tall pines that blocked most of the sky except for a thin circle of light. The ground here was soft and covered with a thick layer of dead pine needles, making it quiet underfoot. I sat down on a fallen log and ate a few handfuls of trail mix. I pulled out my map and checked my location. According to the topographic lines, I was about halfway to the peak I had planned to reach. I filled my water bottle at a small stream trickling through the clearing. The water was clear and cold, and I drank deeply, feeling it wash away the dryness in my throat. The air was filled with the sound of running water, rustling leaves, and distant bird calls. I felt good. After the break, I continued. The trail climbed steeply, twisting through thick brush and over rocky outcrops. My legs burned with effort, and my breathing grew heavy. I stopped a few times to catch my breath and wipe sweat from my forehead. The trees thinned as I gained elevation, revealing patches of blue sky and the tops of distant hills covered in forest. Around midday, I reached a rocky ridge. The trail flattened here, running along a narrow ledge with steep drops on one side. The wind was stronger, cool against my skin, and it carried the sharp scent of pine resin and cold stone. I carefully picked my way along the edge, gripping tree roots and rocks where the path narrowed dangerously. I felt a thrill of fear but also excitement. This was the kind of challenge I had come for. I stopped to look out over the valley below. The forest stretched out in all directions, a sea of green punctuated by patches of bare rock and the faint glint of distant streams. The sky was clear and bright, and the sun shone down, warming my face. I felt small and alive all at once. I knew I was getting close to the summit. The trail ahead looked rougher, more rocks and fewer trees. I took out my map again and noted my position. The summit was just a short distance further, maybe half an hour's hike. As I started up again, the trail became steeper and rockier. Loose stones crunched underfoot, and I had to watch carefully for places to step. The sun climbed higher and the heat grew. I drank water often, trying to stay hydrated. My legs ached from the climb, but I pushed myself forward. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath my left foot. I slipped on a loose rock and barely caught myself on a nearby tree root. My heart jumped into my throat. I looked down the steep slope on my left and shuddered. Falling here would not be good. I took a moment to steady myself, breathing deeply and wiping sweat from my eyes. The trail was narrower here, and I decided to backtrack a few steps to find a safer path. I moved slowly and carefully, testing every rock before putting weight on it. After a few tense minutes, I found a spot where the trail widened again, and I felt safer. I pressed onward, though my heart still pounded from the close call. Not long after, I reached the summit. It was a small, flat area surrounded by jagged rocks. The wind was strong here, whipping through the trees and carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. I sat on a large boulder and took a deep breath, looking out over the world below. The view was incredible. Rolling hills, dense forest, and winding streams stretched to the horizon. The sun was high now, casting sharp shadows and lighting everything in a warm glow. I felt a sense of calm and accomplishment. After a while, I packed up and began the descent. Going down was harder in some ways. The loose rocks made footing tricky, and my knees protested every step. The sun was beginning to lower, casting long shadows across the trail. As I neared the ridge, a sudden movement caught my eye. Off the trail, near a patch of dense bushes, something shifted. At first, I thought it was a deer, but the movement was too deliberate, too slow. My heart sped up again. I froze and listened. Nothing. I waited a few minutes, scanning the underbrush. There was no sign of anything, just the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. I told myself it was probably just a squirrel or some other small animal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I hurried along the ridge, keeping my eyes on the path and the surrounding forest. The wind picked up, making the trees creak and whistle. Shadows lengthened as the sun dipped lower. By the time I reached the clearing, the light was fading fast. I didn't want to be caught out on the trail after dark, especially not alone. I knew the forest could be dangerous at night, with uneven ground and hidden hazards. I filled my water bottle again at the stream and ate some more trail mix, trying to steady my nerves. The forest was growing darker and quieter. The bird calls had stopped, replaced by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant animal noises. I packed up quickly and started the last stretch of trail toward the parking lot. The path was easier now, flatter and wider. My legs were tired, and my backpack felt heavier. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and I pulled out my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the trail ahead. I tried to keep calm, focusing on the path and the markers. Every crack of a twig or sudden rustle made me jump. I reminded myself to breathe and move steadily. After what felt like hours, I spotted the faint glow of car headlights near the parking area. Relief flooded through me. I picked up my pace, stumbling over roots and rocks but determined to get back safely. Finally, I reached the parking lot. The cars were still there, and I felt like I had returned to a safe world. I sat in my car for a moment, heart still racing, hands shaking slightly as I drank water and let myself relax. Looking back at the trail, now cloaked in darkness and shadow, I felt a deep respect for the forest's power and mystery. I knew I had pushed myself, faced fears, and learned my limits. I had been alone, scared at times, but I had also experienced something real and raw. That hike stayed with me, not because of ghosts or monsters, but because of the quiet dangers of the wild, the sudden slips, the shadows that made me question what I saw, and the feeling of being completely alone in a vast, untamed place. When I got home, I cleaned my boots and gear carefully, still thinking about the trail, the forest, and the strange feeling that something had been watching me that day. But I also felt stronger, more alive, ready to come back and face the forest again. But next time, better prepared, more aware, and maybe with someone else along. The woods don't owe anyone anything. They are beautiful but indifferent. That day, I learned how easy it is to feel small and vulnerable in nature, and how important it is to respect that feeling and be ready for whatever the trail might throw your way. I still think about that hike often, how a quiet, normal day in the woods can turn into something that shakes you to your core, not because of stories or legends, but because of real danger and the raw, unpredictable power of the wilderness. And that is the kind of fear I respect the most. I'm not the kind of person who takes unnecessary risks. I like structure, I like knowing what's going to happen. But sometimes I get the itch to push myself, especially when it comes to being outdoors. It's a kind of therapy for me, getting away from the city, the phone, the noise. That's how I ended up planning a solo hiking trip through part of the Umpqua National Forest in Oregon. I'd read about a trail there that wasn't super popular, mostly used by locals or experienced hikers. It wasn't anything extreme, just a few days in the backcountry with my pack and enough supplies. No cell service, no people, no distractions. I needed that. The plan was simple. Park at the gravel trailhead off the old forest road, hike in about 10 miles the first day, then set up camp near a small lake I'd marked on my topo map. Day 2, I'd circle around a different route, hit some elevation, and camp up on a ridge with a good view. Day 3 would be the hike back down, maybe a bit of fishing if I felt like it. I gave my itinerary to my coworker James, just in case. He was the only one who really understood my need to disappear into the woods now and then. The drive out was uneventful. Long stretches of road cutting through thick forest, patches of mist clinging to the trees even though it was almost summer. I passed only one other vehicle on the last stretch of gravel road. When I finally pulled up to the clearing where the trail started, there was no one else around. That was what I liked. I got my gear on, boots laced tight, pack secure, water bottles full, bear spray clipped on my strap. I locked my car, hid the keys in the magnetic box under the bumper, and started walking. The first few miles were peaceful. The air smelled like wet dirt and pine needles. I could hear woodpeckers tapping in the distance, and the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush. The trail wasn't well marked, but I'd printed out the map and had a compass. I made a mental note of the way the terrain changed, slopes, rocks, fallen logs, just in case. I wasn't expecting anything to go wrong, but I always tried to be ready. Around mid-afternoon, clouds started building up overhead. The forecast had said there might be some drizzle, but nothing heavy. Still, I picked up my pace just in case. I didn't want to set up camp in the rain. When I finally reached the lake, it was quiet. The water was still and dark, ringed by tall trees that looked even taller with the gray sky behind them. I found a flat spot about 50 feet from the shore, cleared some sticks, and set up my tent. I got a small fire going with a fire starter block and dry twigs I'd packed in a Ziploc. I cooked a simple meal, rice and lentils from a pouch, then sat by the fire until the sky got dark. That night was quiet. No wind, no rain, just the soft sounds of the forest. I slept light, like I always do when I'm out there, ears tuned to the small creaks and snaps outside the nylon walls of my tent. But nothing happened. I woke up with the first light and felt good. Made some instant coffee, broke down the tent, packed everything up carefully like I always did. I hated leaving any trace behind. Day 2 was more uphill. The trail was rougher, overgrown in spots. I had to scramble over some fallen trees and pick my way through patches where the path vanished under ferns and moss. Still, I stayed on course. I checked my compass often, cross-referenced the ridgelines with what I saw on the map. The forest felt older up here, thicker, like fewer people had ever passed through. I liked that at first, By late afternoon, I was about 2 miles from the ridge I'd planned to camp on. I was getting tired, legs sore, shoulders aching from the weight of the pack. I stopped to drink and noticed something odd. There was a tree nearby with deep scratch marks on the bark. Not fresh, but not old either. Long, parallel gouges, maybe 4 feet up from the ground. I stared at them for a while, then looked around. Everything was still. I told myself it was probably a black bear. Nothing to worry about, but I felt uneasy. About a half-mile later, I passed another tree with scratches. These looked fresher. There was still some pale wood exposed where the bark had been torn off. I kept moving, trying not to focus on it. I told myself it could still be natural. Animals mark trees all the time. But then I started noticing other things. Small bones near the trail, picked clean, arranged strangely. Not just scattered, but in little piles. Twigs snapped in ways that didn't feel random. A log across the path that looked like it had been dragged, not fallen. It was getting late, and I didn't want to be hiking in the dark, so I picked up my pace. I reached the ridge just before the sun dipped behind the trees. The view was beautiful, I'll give it that. Miles of forest stretching out below me, layers of green and gold fading into blue. But I couldn't enjoy it. Not with that crawling feeling between my shoulders, like I was being watched. I set up camp quickly. I didn't build a fire, didn't want to draw attention. Just ate a cold meal and sat with my back to a boulder, watching the trees. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my tent, fully clothed, knife close by, listening. At one point, I thought I heard something. Slow crunching steps outside, like someone walking carefully. Then a soft thump. I held my breath for what felt like hours. Eventually, the sound stopped, but I didn't sleep at all. At first light, I broke down camp faster than I ever had. I didn't eat. I just packed and started moving. My plan to fish was out the window. I just wanted to get back. I kept thinking about the scratches, the bones, the sounds. Maybe it was all in my head, but I couldn't shake it. I moved quickly, barely pausing to drink. About 4 miles from the car, I realized I wasn't on the right trail. The trees looked wrong. The slope was different. I backtracked, tried to find the spot where I'd gone off course. Couldn't. Everything looked the same. Trees, moss, ferns. I pulled out the map and compass, tried to reset, but nothing lined up. That's when I panicked a little. I knew I wasn't far from the road, maybe a few miles at most, but in this thick forest, a few miles could be a death sentence. I forced myself to calm down, sat down, drank some water, checked everything again. I picked a direction that made the most sense, downhill toward the road I'd driven in on. I started walking. Hours passed. I saw more scratched trees, more bones. Once I thought I saw a figure through the trees, just for a second. Tall still, gone when I looked again. Eventually, I came to a dry creek bed. I followed it, thinking it would lead downhill. It did, but it twisted and doubled back in ways that confused me. My legs were starting to give out. I hadn't eaten since the night before. I tripped over a root and went down hard. My hand landed on something sharp, a broken antler. I almost screamed. By late afternoon, I was stumbling more than walking. I saw a clearing ahead and pushed through the brush. And there it was, my car. My car. I almost dropped to my knees. I don't know how I'd ended up circling back, but I didn't care. I crawled under and grabbed the keys from the magnetic box, unlocked the door, threw my pack in the back. I didn't even change out of my boots. I just got in and started the engine. The drive out was a blur. Every shadow between the trees made me flinch. I didn't stop until I hit the main road, and even then I didn't relax. I drove straight home, didn't unpack for 2 days, didn't tell anyone the full story, just said I'd gotten turned around. I didn't even go back to retrieve the trash bag I'd buried, something I always did. I don't know what I saw out there. Maybe nothing. Maybe just my mind playing tricks on me after 2 nights of little sleep and too much isolation. But something was off. Something had been watching me. I don't go into deep woods alone anymore. I still hike, still camp, but always with someone else, and never off trail. Not ever again. The sun had just begun its slow climb above the horizon when I laced up my boots outside the small rental cabin near the trailhead. The air was crisp, cold in the early morning hours of late autumn, the kind that felt fresh and biting but not yet harsh. I had planned this trip for weeks, a solo hike deep into the mountains of the national park. I was ready for a few days away from the noise of the city, from the endless rush of life that left me drained and restless. Hiking had always been my way to recharge, to find some clarity in the vastness of nature. My pack was heavy but well-balanced. A tent, a sleeping bag, enough food for 3 days, water purification tablets, a basic first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I trusted my gear and my instincts. I'd studied the route carefully. I knew the trail started easy, a gentle slope weaving through thick pine forests before climbing steeper into rocky ridges and open meadows. The forest was alive with morning sounds, the distant call of a jay, the rustle of leaves under a squirrel's tiny paws. The path was damp from last night's light rain. As I stepped onto the trail, the soft soil yielded beneath my boots, the scent of wet earth filling the air. I felt a calm wash over me as the trees closed in around the path, their towering trunks standing like silent sentinels. I walked steadily, enjoying the rhythm of my feet and breath. I kept to a moderate pace, not rushing but keeping a steady forward motion. Around me, the forest shifted subtly as I climbed higher. Birches with golden leaves replaced some of the evergreens, and the occasional rock outcrop appeared. I paused often to take in the views between the trees, patches of mist still clinging to the lower valleys. By midday, I reached a small clearing near a stream. The water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth stones, and I took a break to drink and eat a sandwich. The sun was now bright, warming the back of my neck, but there was a chill in the shade. I checked my map and compass, confirming I was on track. The trail ahead curved up toward a ridge that would offer better views and a place to camp. Setting off again, I noticed the trail became rougher. Loose rocks and roots jutted up from the ground, demanding more attention with each step. The trees grew thinner, replaced by scrub and hardy shrubs clinging to the rocky soil. The air grew thinner, cooler. The wind picked up as I gained elevation, whispering through the branches and bending the grasses. About 2 hours later, I reached the ridge's edge. The view was breathtaking. Below stretched a patchwork of forests and lakes, the mountains rolling away into the distance. I stood there, breathing deeply, feeling a quiet pride at making it this far. This was exactly what I had come for, the kind of solitude and grandeur that reset something deep inside. I set up camp not far from the ridge, where the ground was relatively flat. I pitched my tent with practiced ease, securing the guy lines tightly against the gusting wind. Inside the tent, I cooked a simple meal on my portable stove, instant noodles and a handful of trail mix. The sun began to dip behind the peaks, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. That first night was cold, the wind rattling the tent fabric. I woke often, adjusting my sleeping bag to stay warm. The quiet was profound, the kind of silence only found far from civilization. I felt a mix of excitement and vulnerability, alone in the wilderness. The next day, I planned to descend into a valley on the other side of the ridge and follow a less traveled trail that looped back toward the main road. According to the map, this path would take me through dense forest, past a small lake, and eventually reconnect with the park road about 10 miles from my cabin. I packed my gear carefully, double-checked my route, and set off at dawn. The wind was calmer now, and the morning light filtered softly through the trees. The descent was steep and slow. The trail was narrow, edged by thick underbrush, fallen leaves damp and slippery. I was alert, watching my footing carefully. About halfway down, the trail crossed a small creek, its waters swollen from recent rains. I took a moment to fill my water bottle, enjoying the cool freshness. Then I continued. Hours passed with steady walking. The forest closed around me again, the canopy dense. Shadows deepened. I noticed the sounds of birds had lessened. An uneasy feeling settled in my chest, subtle but persistent. I told myself it was just the isolation, the unfamiliar territory. But something was off. After a long stretch, I reached the small lake marked on the map. It was peaceful, ringed by tall pines, their reflections shimmering on the water's surface. I rested here, taking in the quiet. The sky was overcast now, clouds thickening and dulling the light. The temperature dropped noticeably. I knew I needed to keep moving. I glanced at my watch. It was early afternoon. The loop trail should be easier from here, more clearly marked. I set off around the lake's edge, following a faint path. At first, the trail was easy to see, but after a few hundred meters, the markers became sparse. The path narrowed, twisting through thick undergrowth. I slowed, scanning carefully for the next signpost. A creeping feeling of being watched crawled over my skin. I shook the thought away. No one else was supposed to be on this trail. It was barely used. Maybe a deer had passed nearby. I kept going. The sky darkened further. A low rumble of thunder echoed somewhere far off. I felt the first drops of rain. I quickened my pace, but the trail was now hard to follow. Branches and bushes blocked the way. The ground was soft and slippery. Then I realized I had missed a marker. I stopped and studied the map. The trail should curve sharply left ahead, but the path I was on seemed to continue straight. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking my jacket and making the map nearly unreadable. My heart quickened. I backtracked a few steps, looking carefully. No signposts. The forest looked the same in every direction. I turned slowly, trying to spot anything familiar, but the trees all blended together. The trail markers were gone or obscured. Panic began to creep in. I reminded myself to stay calm. I pulled out my compass. North was roughly behind me, toward the ridge and my camp. I was somewhere between the ridge and the lake, but I didn't know exactly where. I decided to head back the way I came to find the main trail again. Step by step, I moved through the dense forest. The rain turned into a steady downpour. Branches slapped against my face and arms. My boots squelched in the mud. The light was fading fast. I kept my compass steady and tried to follow what I thought was the way back. But the forest grew thicker. I tripped over roots and stones. My legs ached from the strain. I was cold and wet, my clothes clinging to me. Then I heard a noise, a rustling, low and quick, not like the wind. Something was moving nearby. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The noise stopped. I waited, heart pounding. Then it started again, closer this time. Something was breaking branches, moving fast through the undergrowth. I scanned the trees, trying to catch a glimpse. A large shape darted between the trunks, a dark figure, too big for a deer, too fast for a human to be just walking casually. My mind raced. Was it a bear? A large predator? I had seen warning signs about bears in this area, but I hadn't expected to actually run into one. I kept as still as I could, hoping it would pass. The shape vanished as quickly as it appeared. Silence returned, thick and heavy. I realized I had lost track of direction while watching the movement. I was disoriented, soaked, tired, and now scared. I pulled my jacket tighter, trying to steady my breathing. I knew I couldn't just stand here. I chose a direction on my compass, west, toward the way I thought the main trail was. Step by slow step, I moved forward. The rain worsened, thunder rolled closer, and the sky flashed with pale lightning. The forest around me darkened, shadows stretching longer. The mud was deeper, making every step a struggle. I stumbled several times, scraping my hands and knees on sharp rocks. After what felt like hours, I found a narrow dirt path, faint but unmistakable. I couldn't be sure if it was the main trail, but it was the best sign I'd seen all day. I followed it with desperate hope. As the rain lightened into a drizzle, I noticed something ahead. An old, weathered trail marker, half covered in moss. Relief flooded through me. I was back on the main route. I moved faster, fatigue forgotten for a moment. The trail curved and climbed, and soon the trees thinned, revealing a slope I recognized, the way up to the ridge camp. I pushed myself harder, muscles burning, lungs gasping. Finally, the outlines of my tent appeared in the fading light. I collapsed inside, shaking, soaked, exhausted. I lit my small camping stove, warming my hands over the flame. My heart was still racing, but I felt safe again.